Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into what is arguably the most defining, complex, and just absolutely dramatic period in all of American history. We're looking at the monumental crisis of 1861, and we're really framing it as the ultimate test of the nation's future. I mean, this was a time when the very fabric of the United States was pushed to its absolute breaking point, literally pitting brother against brother. So let's just jump right in.
So think about this for a second. What happens when a nation becomes completely divided over its deepest beliefs? It's a pretty unsettling question, isn't it? Well, in 1861, the United States was forced to answer it. And the American Civil War wasn't just some regional dispute over territory. It was a fundamental, bloody struggle over freedom, the institution of slavery, states' rights, and ultimately whether the nation was even going to survive intact.
600,000. Over 4 brutal years, more than 600,000 soldiers lost their lives. Just let the sheer scale of that sink in for a moment. That number represented roughly 2% of the entire American population at the time. To put that catastrophic human cost into perspective for us today, that would be the equivalent of losing over 6 million Americans right now. No way around it, it remains the deadliest conflict in all of American history.
Section 1. A nation divided. Now, to really grasp how we arrived at that horrific death toll, we've got to rewind the clock a few decades to the mid-1800s. The US was expanding westward at lightning speed, but every single time a new territory was added, the exact same incredibly tense question popped up. Would slavery be allowed there? Politicians kept trying to slap a band-aid on the issue with various compromises, but they were ignoring a massive structural incompatibility. America was basically splitting into two totally different worlds. Up in the north, it was buzzing with industry, factories, expanding railroads, all built on the ideal of free labor. But contrast that with the south. Their economy was almost entirely dependent on agriculture, specifically cotton, and crucially, they relied directly on the forced labor of millions of enslaved African Americans. This wasn't just an economic difference. The Southern reliance on chattel slavery was a deeply entrenched social caste system that fundamentally threatened the North's ideals. You basically had two totally incompatible systems pulling the whole country apart at the seams.
Okay, so by 1860, this tension finally boils over into a full-blown crisis with the election of Abraham Lincoln. Since he firmly opposed expanding slavery into new territories, Southern leaders felt like their entire way of life was facing an existential threat. In fact, just to show how fractured democracy was at this point, Lincoln's name wasn't even on the ballot in most Southern states. So before he even takes office in early 1861, several Southern states say, "We're out," and they leave the Union entirely to form the Confederate States of America. And then, the spark finally ignites. April 12, 1861. Confederate forces fire on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. While the casualties in that first bombardment were minimal, it marked the official beginning of the Civil War. America had just stepped into its darkest chapter.
Section 2. The First Modern War.
As the conflict exploded, the pace of everything just accelerated dramatically. Young men left home in droves, completely transforming the demographics of towns everywhere. But when we think of war, we think of bullets and artillery. Actually, the greatest threat to these soldiers was an invisible enemy. Medical care back then was, well, incredibly primitive. Diseases like dysentery, typhoid, and pneumonia spread like wildfire through these cramped military camps. In fact, illnesses killed roughly 2/3 of everyone who died in the war. Meanwhile, back at home, women were stepping up into absolutely vital new roles, running farms, managing businesses, and operating the very hospitals where these sick men were being treated.
But right alongside that primitive medicine, we saw this massive leap forward in military technology. It was literally the industrialization of death. Suddenly, railroads are being used to transport thousands of troops across vast distances, completely changing logistics. And the telegraph? An absolute game changer. It allowed real-time communication across hundreds of miles. President Lincoln could literally sit in the War Department telegraph office and instantly chat with his generals in the field. Out on the water, ironclad warships made older wooden ships completely obsolete overnight. All these wild innovations are exactly why historians usually call the Civil War one of history's very first modern wars.
Section 3. The Turning Point. As this grueling war dragged on, the momentum began to pivot, and the entire underlying purpose of the war shifted. Fast forward to January 1st, 1863, when President Lincoln makes a world-changing decision. He issues the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that enslaved people in Confederate-held territory were to be free. Now, a really crucial kind of advanced detail here. The proclamation intentionally only freed slaves in states that were actively rebelling. This was a stroke of sheer political genius, honestly. It strategically kept the loyal, slave-holding border states in the Union while still securing a massive moral victory. From that moment on, the Union wasn't just fighting to keep the map intact, they were actively fighting for freedom. And following this, thousands of formerly enslaved African Americans courageously joined the Union Army to help secure that freedom. Just a few months later, in July 1863, we hit the definitive military turning point, Gettysburg. The two armies clashed in Pennsylvania for 3 agonizing days. The sheer scale of this fight resulted in a staggering 50,000 casualties, and it culminated in Confederate General Robert E. Lee's final disastrous assault, known as Pickett's Charge. That unimaginable loss of life permanently broke the Confederacy's offensive momentum for the rest of the war. And of course, it was right there, months later, that Lincoln delivered his famous Gettysburg Address, powerfully reaffirming America's commitment to equality.
Section 4. The Final Surrender.
By early 1865, continuous defeats and huge food shortages had left the South completely exhausted. Back in 1864, Union General Sherman launched his famous March to the Sea. His army basically captured Atlanta and marched relentlessly across Georgia, purposefully destroying railroads, warehouses, the whole shebang. It was the birth of total war, targeting the enemy's economic infrastructure, not just their military. This absolute devastation sped up the end, and finally, on April 9, 1865, General Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The war was effectively over. The Union was saved. But guys, that triumph was instantly shattered by sudden tragedy.
Just 5 days after Lee's surrender, 5 days after this fractured nation could finally take a breath and celebrate this incredible victory, President Lincoln went to a play at Ford's Theater. That evening, on April 14th, he was shot by John Wilkes Booth, and he died the very next morning. Talk about whiplash for the American public. The contrast between the joy of the surrender and this heartbreaking assassination plunged the entire nation into deep mourning. Lincoln was killed just days after securing his life's work, instantly cementing him as a historical martyr who guided the country through its absolute greatest crisis.
Section 5. A Costly Legacy. The cannons might have fallen silent in 1865, but the Civil War changed America forever. The shockwaves? We are still feeling them today. The most immediate legacy was the 13th Amendment, legally abolishing slavery nationwide and granting freedom to millions. But this was just the start of a remarkably difficult period known as Reconstruction. And listen, Reconstruction wasn't just about fixing broken bridges. It was a contested, often violent political revolution over who gets to be an American citizen. It kicked off a struggle for equal rights that would last for generations. The lessons learned back then continue to actively shape our modern conversations about democracy and equality right now.
So, as we wrap up, we can see the American Civil War was far more than just a military conflict. It was, quote, a defining moment that tested the ideals upon which the United States was founded. The victories, the staggering sacrifices, and the lasting consequences of those 4 years actively built the foundation of the America we live in right now. So looking back at that history, we really have to ask ourselves, are the fault lines of 1861 truly healed, or are those exact same founding ideals still being contested today? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for exploring this explainer with me.